The moment my life broke started with something small. A phone buzzing on the couch between us. I remember looking at Olivia and saying, "Your phone has been going off all night. Are you secretly famous now?" I tried to sound playful, but she barely looked up. Her thumbs moved quickly across the screen while she said, "It's just work stuff, Daniel. Nothing important." The room was quiet except for the rain tapping against the window and the soft glow of her phone lighting her face. After 4 years together, I never questioned her loyalty. Trust had always been easy between us. Still, something about the way she kept turning the screen away from me made my stomach feel strange. I leaned back on the couch and joked, "You know, when someone hides their phone this much, it usually means they're planning a surprise party." She sighed like I had annoyed her. "Can we not do this tonight?" she said. "Do what?" I asked. "This suspicious boyfriend routine." I laughed lightly and raised my hands. "Relax. I'm just teasing." But the truth was that uneasy feeling in my chest didn't go away. A few minutes later Olivia stood up and stretched. "I'm going to take a shower," she said, finally putting her phone down on the couch beside me. "Don't stay up too late." "Okay," I replied. She walked toward the hallway, humming softly like nothing was wrong. The bathroom door closed and the apartment fell silent again. I stared at the TV for a moment, trying to focus on the movie we had been watching. Then the phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally I glanced down. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. Ryan. My eyebrows tightened. "Who's Ryan?" I muttered quietly to myself. Another message appeared before the screen dimmed. The preview showed a short line that made my chest tighten. "Good night, beautiful. I can't stop thinking about last night." My heart suddenly began pounding. I stared at the message like my brain refused to process the words. "No, that doesn't make sense," I whispered. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe it was some joke. I picked up the phone slowly, feeling like I was about to open something that could destroy everything. The screen unlocked easily. The message thread opened. What I saw didn't feel real. Weeks of conversations filled the screen. Dinner plans. Flirty jokes. Pictures from expensive restaurants. My hands began shaking as I scrolled. One message made my stomach twist into a knot. "I wish Daniel would stop getting in the way." My throat went dry. The bathroom door opened behind me. Olivia stepped into the living room, drying her hair with a towel. She froze the second she saw her phone in my hands. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she asked slowly. My voice felt weak when I answered. "Who's Ryan?" Her expression hardened. "Why are you looking through my phone?" she said sharply. "That's your first question?" I asked, holding the screen up. "Not the messages?" She crossed her arms. "You had no right to snoop." I stared at her in disbelief. I saw the notification. I didn't even have to unlock it. The silence between us felt suffocating. "Tell me I'm misunderstanding this," I said quietly. She looked away toward the window. "Olivia," I said again, louder now, "who is Ryan?" She exhaled slowly like she was tired of the conversation. "He's someone I've been seeing." The words hit me like a punch straight through my chest. "Seeing?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "What does that even mean?" She rubbed her forehead like she was annoyed. "Daniel, please don't turn this into a huge scene." I stared at her, stunned. "You're cheating on me and you're worried about a scene?" She looked frustrated. "It's not that simple." "Then explain it," I said. She hesitated before speaking again. "Ryan and I met a few months ago. Things just happened." "How many months?" I asked. She stayed quiet. My voice rose. "How many months, Olivia?" 3, she finally admitted. The word echoed in my head. 3 months of lies. 3 months of fake smiles and late-night excuses. "Did you sleep with him?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I stepped backward like the air had been knocked out of me. "You did," I said quietly. She looked irritated now. "Why are you acting like this is the end of the world?" I stared at her, unable to believe the person standing in front of me was the same woman I had loved for 4 years. "Because it is the end of my world," I said. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. "I can't deal with this tonight," she said. "I need space." "You already had space," I replied. "You had a whole other relationship." She paused with her hand on the door handle. "Did you ever love me?" I asked softly. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she opened the door and walked out. The apartment fell silent again. I sat there on the couch, staring at the empty doorway. The rain outside kept falling while one terrible thought repeated in my mind. The woman I trusted with my entire future had just become a stranger. And deep down I knew something even worse. Tonight wasn't just the night Olivia left. It was the night the life I believed in completely disappeared. I didn't sleep at all after Olivia walked out. I sat on the couch staring at the dark TV screen while the rain outside kept falling. My mind replayed every memory like a movie I couldn't turn off. I whispered to myself, how did everything fall apart this fast? I could still hear Olivia's voice from our first date 4 years ago. Daniel, you're the only person who actually listens to me, Olivia had said while laughing across the small cafe table. I remembered smiling and replying, that's because Olivia Brooks talks like every word matters. Later that same night Olivia squeezed my hand and said, promise Daniel Parker won't disappear from my life. I laughed back then and said, Daniel Parker isn't going anywhere. Now I sat in the same apartment we built together, whispering to the empty room, Daniel Parker kept the promise. Olivia Brooks didn't. I walked slowly to the kitchen and opened the cabinet where we kept the small wooden box with our promise rings. I picked up the ring Olivia once placed on my finger and muttered quietly, what happened to us, Olivia Brooks? The silence answered nothing. Morning light crept through the window when the door finally opened. Olivia stepped inside like nothing unusual had happened. Olivia looked tired but calm. I stood up slowly and said, Olivia Brooks left in the middle of the night. Does Olivia Brooks have anything to say? Olivia sighed and dropped the purse on the table. Daniel Parker, this conversation isn't going to be easy. I crossed my arms and replied, the truth rarely is. Olivia avoided my eyes for a moment before saying quietly, Olivia Brooks needs space. I stared at Olivia and asked, space for what? Olivia answered, to figure things out. I laughed bitterly and said, Olivia Brooks already figured things out with Ryan Carter. Olivia frowned. Ryan Carter isn't the only reason. I shook my head slowly. Then explain it. Olivia looked around the apartment and said softly, Ryan Carter offers a different life. Ryan Carter has connections, travel opportunities, and bigger plans. I felt my chest tighten as I asked, so Daniel Parker isn't enough? Olivia hesitated before answering, Daniel Parker is kind and loyal, but Daniel Parker is comfortable with a small life. I whispered, a small life. Olivia nodded slightly. Ryan Carter dreams bigger. The words hit harder than the betrayal. I stared at Olivia Brooks and asked quietly, did Olivia Brooks ever plan to tell Daniel Parker the truth? Olivia replied, eventually. I shook my head and said, eventually isn't honesty. Eventually is convenience. Before Olivia could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. Marcus Lee's name flashed on the screen. I answered and said quietly, Marcus Lee picked the worst morning to call. Marcus immediately asked, Daniel Parker sounds terrible. What happened? I hesitated before saying, Olivia Brooks cheated with Ryan Carter. There was a long pause before Marcus exploded through the phone. Ryan Carter? The rich guy from that marketing event. I replied, yes. Marcus cursed loudly and said, Daniel Parker deserves better than that. I glanced toward Olivia Brooks while saying, Marcus Lee, Olivia Brooks is standing right here. Marcus lowered the voice slightly but still sounded furious. Then Olivia Brooks should hear this clearly. Daniel Parker shouldn't chase someone who treats loyalty like garbage. Olivia crossed the arms and muttered, Marcus Lee doesn't understand the situation. Marcus immediately responded, Marcus Lee understands enough. I ended the call before the argument got worse. Olivia picked up a suitcase from the hallway and began packing clothes. I asked slowly, is Olivia Brooks really leaving? Olivia zipped the suitcase and replied, for now. I whispered, for Ryan Carter? Olivia didn't answer directly. Olivia simply said, Ryan Carter offered Olivia Brooks a place to stay. That sentence felt like the final crack in something already broken. I leaned against the wall and watched quietly while Olivia packed the last few things. Olivia lifted the suitcase and walked toward the door. I said softly, 4 years together, Olivia Brooks. Olivia paused but didn't turn around. I continued, Daniel Parker believed Olivia Brooks was the future. Olivia finally spoke without looking back. Daniel Parker will be okay. I laughed weakly and replied, Daniel Parker wasn't worried about survival. Daniel Parker was worried about love. Olivia opened the door slowly. For a moment the hallway light spilled into the apartment we once called home. Olivia said one final sentence before stepping outside. Ryan Carter understands Olivia Brooks better. The door closed behind Olivia Brooks with a quiet click. I stood there staring at the empty doorway, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. After a long moment I whispered to myself, Daniel Parker just lost the person Daniel Parker loved most. I sat back down on the couch, realizing something that hurt even more than the betrayal. The relationship didn't end with a fight. The relationship ended with Olivia Brooks choosing someone else. The weeks after Olivia left felt like living inside a quiet storm. Every corner of the apartment reminded me of something we once shared. I stood in the kitchen one morning staring at 2 coffee mugs before whispering to myself, Daniel Parker doesn't need 2 anymore. My voice sounded strange in the empty room. I tried to focus on work calls, but even simple conversations felt exhausting. One afternoon my phone rang and Emma Parker's name appeared. Daniel Parker sounds terrible lately, Emma said the moment I answered. I sighed and replied, Daniel Parker is fine. Emma laughed softly and said, Emma Parker knows that voice. Daniel Parker is not fine. I leaned against the kitchen counter and muttered, Olivia Brooks walked away like 4 years meant nothing. Emma stayed quiet for a moment before answering gently, Olivia Brooks leaving does not erase Daniel Parker's value. I rubbed my eyes and whispered, Daniel Parker keeps wondering what Daniel Parker did wrong. Emma's voice grew firm. Daniel Parker loved honestly. Loyalty is not a mistake. Those words stayed in my mind long after the call ended. 2 days later Emma Parker showed up at the apartment door carrying grocery bags. I opened the door and said weakly, Emma Parker didn't have to drive this far. Emma stepped inside and replied, Daniel Parker clearly forgot how to take care of Daniel Parker. Emma placed the bags on the kitchen table and looked around the messy apartment. Daniel Parker hasn't been sleeping, Emma said quietly. I shrugged and answered, sleep feels pointless. Emma crossed the arms and said firmly, Daniel Parker needs to stop punishing Daniel Parker for Olivia Brooks' choices. I sat down at the table and stared at the floor. Daniel Parker keeps thinking about the last conversation, I admitted. Emma pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Emma Parker remembers Olivia Brooks, Emma said calmly. Olivia Brooks always wanted excitement and attention. I frowned slightly. Daniel Parker thought love was enough. Emma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Love should have been enough. The problem was never Daniel Parker. I looked up slowly and asked, then why does everything still feel broken? Emma smiled gently. Because healing takes time. Daniel Parker just started breathing again. Later that week Marcus Lee knocked loudly on my door. I opened it and Marcus immediately said, Daniel Parker looks like a ghost. I sighed and replied, Marcus Lee always had great timing. Marcus walked inside and glanced around the apartment. Marcus Lee heard the full story, Marcus said. Olivia Brooks ran to Ryan Carter. I nodded silently. Marcus shook the head and muttered, Ryan Carter doesn't deserve the space inside Daniel Parker's mind. I sat on the couch and said quietly, Daniel Parker doesn't know how to move forward. Marcus sat down beside me and replied firmly, Daniel Parker starts small. I looked confused and asked, small how? Marcus grinned slightly. Marcus Lee and Daniel Parker are going outside tomorrow. Fresh air, real food, maybe a gym membership. I laughed weakly and said, Marcus Lee thinks exercise fixes heartbreak? Marcus shrugged. Marcus Lee thinks staying trapped in this apartment will destroy Daniel Parker. The honesty in Marcus's voice made it impossible to argue. A few days later Marcus convinced me to attend a therapy session with Dr. Helen Moore. I sat in the quiet office feeling uncomfortable while Dr. Helen Moore smiled warmly. Daniel Parker, tell Dr. Helen Moore what hurts the most, Dr. Helen Moore said gently. I hesitated before answering. Daniel Parker trusted Olivia Brooks completely. Dr. Helen Moore nodded slowly. Betrayal breaks more than relationships, Dr. Helen Moore explained. Betrayal damages identity. I frowned slightly. Daniel Parker doesn't understand. Dr. Helen Moore leaned forward and said softly, Daniel Parker believed loyalty guaranteed safety. I thought about those words carefully before whispering, that belief feels broken now. Dr. Helen Moore replied, broken beliefs can be rebuilt with stronger foundations. I sat quietly for a moment and asked, what if Olivia Brooks comes back? Dr. Helen Moore watched me closely before answering, the real question is whether Daniel Parker will still be waiting. That sentence stayed in my mind long after the session ended. That evening I returned to the apartment and stood near the window watching the sunset over the city. The room still held memories, but something inside me felt slightly different. I whispered quietly to myself, Daniel Parker cannot live in the past forever. My phone buzzed on the table and Olivia Brooks' name appeared on the screen. For a long moment I simply stared at the phone. My chest tightened as memories rushed back, but I didn't answer. Instead I turned the phone face down and said softly, Daniel Parker needs to move forward. The silence in the apartment no longer felt suffocating. It felt like space. And for the first time since Olivia Brooks left, I made a quiet promise to myself. Daniel Parker would stop waiting for Olivia Brooks to come back. A few weeks after Olivia left, my phone started showing pieces of a life that no longer included me. Marcus sent me a message one afternoon and said, "Daniel, Marcus Lee just saw Olivia Brooks on social media again." I replied quietly, "Daniel Parker already knows." Marcus sighed through the phone. "Daniel Parker should stop looking." I leaned back in my chair and answered honestly, "Daniel Parker keeps telling Daniel Parker the same thing." The photos were everywhere. Olivia Brooks standing beside Ryan Carter in expensive restaurants, Olivia Brooks smiling on a beach somewhere far away, Olivia Brooks holding a glass of champagne at parties with people who looked wealthy and confident. I stared at one picture longer than I should have. Olivia Brooks looked happy. Marcus spoke again through the phone. Marcus Lee can hear the silence. Daniel Parker is looking at the photos again. I muttered quietly, "Daniel Parker wonders if Olivia Brooks ever looked that happy with Daniel Parker." Marcus responded immediately. Daniel Parker gave Olivia Brooks loyalty. Ryan Carter gave Olivia Brooks excitement. Those things looked different on a camera. I didn't answer. I simply locked the phone and whispered to myself, "Daniel Parker needs to stop doing this." Later that evening Marcus Lee stopped by the apartment. Marcus walked in, grabbed the phone from my hand and said firmly, "Marcus Lee is deleting Olivia Brooks from Daniel Parker's life." I reached out quickly and said, "Wait?" Marcus raised an eyebrow and asked, "Daniel Parker still wants to watch Olivia Brooks living with Ryan Carter?" I shrugged slightly. Daniel Parker doesn't know why curiosity keeps winning. Marcus sat down across from me and said calmly, "Marcus Lee understands curiosity. Marcus Lee doesn't understand self-torture." I looked at the floor and said quietly, "Daniel Parker keeps thinking maybe Olivia Brooks regrets something." Marcus shook the head. If Olivia Brooks regretted leaving Daniel Parker, Olivia Brooks wouldn't be smiling beside Ryan Carter in every picture. I sighed and rubbed my forehead. Marcus Lee is probably right. Marcus stood up and tossed the phone back onto the table. Daniel Parker needs to focus on Daniel Parker's own life. I nodded slowly. Daniel Parker is trying. Marcus smiled slightly and said, "Trying is enough for now." A few nights later I was sitting alone on the couch when my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Olivia Brooks. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. I whispered quietly, "Olivia Brooks finally decided to call." The phone kept ringing. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity pushed me to answer. I pressed the button and said calmly, "Daniel Parker speaking." There was a short pause before Olivia's voice came through softly. "Hi, Daniel." The hesitation in Olivia Brooks' voice surprised me. I replied simply, "Olivia Brooks sounds unsure." Olivia exhaled quietly and said, Olivia Brooks didn't know if Daniel Parker would answer. I leaned back on the couch and answered calmly, "Daniel Parker almost didn't." Another pause followed. Olivia asked slowly, "Daniel Parker, are things okay?" I raised an eyebrow and replied, "That question sounds strange coming from Olivia Brooks." Olivia spoke carefully. Olivia Brooks just wanted to check. I looked at the ceiling and said quietly, "Daniel Parker is learning how to breathe again." Olivia didn't respond for a moment. Then Olivia asked softly, "Daniel Parker sounds different." I smiled slightly and replied, "Different can be good." Olivia hesitated before speaking again. "Ryan Carter and Olivia Brooks have been traveling a lot." I nodded even though Olivia couldn't see me. Daniel Parker saw the pictures. Olivia sounded almost defensive. "Ryan Carter likes showing places." I answered calmly, "Ryan Carter clearly likes attention." Olivia didn't laugh. Instead Olivia asked quietly, "Daniel Parker isn't angry anymore?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. Daniel Parker was angry for a while. Now Daniel Parker is tired of carrying that weight. Olivia's voice lowered. Olivia Brooks didn't expect Daniel Parker to sound so calm. I replied honestly, "Daniel Parker didn't expect that either." The silence between us felt different from our last conversation. Finally I said, "Olivia Brooks should enjoy the life Olivia Brooks chose." Olivia responded slowly, "Daniel Parker deserves happiness too." I nodded even though Olivia couldn't see it. Daniel Parker is starting to believe that. After the call ended, I placed the phone on the table and stared at the quiet room. Something inside me felt lighter than before. I whispered to myself, Daniel Parker didn't beg. Daniel Parker didn't argue. Daniel Parker simply moved forward. For the first time since the breakup, I noticed a small shift inside my chest. The power in that conversation didn't belong to Olivia Brooks anymore. The power belonged to the version of Daniel Parker that was finally learning how to live without Olivia Brooks. Months passed quietly and my life slowly began to look different. One morning Marcus called and said, "Daniel Parker sounds awake early again." "That's new." I laughed lightly and replied, "Daniel Parker started going to the gym before work." Marcus chuckled. Marcus Lee knew something changed. I wiped sweat from my forehead and said, "Daniel Parker needed something to focus on." Marcus answered quickly, "Marcus Lee calls that progress." Later that day Marcus met me at a small cafe and slid a folder across the table. Marcus said, "Marcus Lee wants Daniel Parker to look at a business opportunity." I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Daniel Parker is suddenly a businessman?" Marcus grinned and replied, "Daniel Parker always had the brain for it. Daniel Parker just needed confidence." I opened the folder slowly and studied the papers. "Marcus Lee believes Daniel Parker can handle this?" Marcus leaned back and said firmly, "Marcus Lee believes Daniel Parker stopped underestimating Daniel Parker." Hearing that made something inside my chest feel stronger. My routine began changing quickly. Every morning started with exercise, work felt more focused, and evenings became quieter but peaceful. One afternoon Emma called and said, "Emma Parker needs help at a volunteer event this weekend." I asked curiously, "What kind of event?" Emma laughed and replied, "Community fundraiser." Emma Parker promised extra hands. I agreed without hesitation. When Saturday arrived, I walked into the busy hall and said, "Emma Parker recruited half the city." Emma smiled warmly and replied, "Daniel Parker needed to see life outside the apartment." While setting up tables I noticed a woman organizing donation boxes nearby. Emma walked over and said, "Daniel Parker should meet Laura Bennett." The woman looked up and smiled politely. Emma continued, "Laura Bennett volunteered 3 years in a row." I shook Laura's hand and said, "Daniel Parker is new to this." Laura laughed softly and replied, "Laura Bennett can tell. Daniel Parker looks like someone who wandered into the wrong building." I smiled and said, "Daniel Parker wandered in hoping to help." Laura nodded approvingly. Laura Bennett likes that answer. During the event Laura and I spent most of the afternoon sorting donations together. At one point Laura asked, "Daniel Parker always volunteer?" I shook my head and replied honestly, "Daniel Parker is rebuilding life after a difficult breakup." Laura paused before saying gently, "Laura Bennett appreciates honesty." I looked slightly surprised and said, "Daniel Parker forgot how refreshing honesty feels." Laura leaned against the table and said calmly, "Laura Bennett believes honesty saves time and heartbreak." I laughed quietly. Daniel Parker learned that lesson recently. Laura studied my face for a moment and asked softly, "Does Daniel Parker still think about the past?" I shrugged. "Daniel Parker thinks about the future more often now." Laura smiled warmly. Laura Bennett likes that direction. Later while cleaning up chairs I asked, "Laura Bennett volunteers every year?" Laura nodded and replied, "Helping people reminds Laura Bennett what matters." I answered thoughtfully, "Daniel Parker spent too long focusing on the wrong things." Laura responded gently, "Daniel Parker sounds like someone growing." Over the next few weeks Laura and I met again during other volunteer projects Emma organized. One evening we walked out of the community center together, and Laura asked, "Daniel Parker seems calmer these days." I nodded slightly and said, "Life feels lighter." Laura smiled and replied, "Laura Bennett noticed." We stopped near the parking lot and Laura said, "Laura Bennett enjoys conversations with Daniel Parker." I felt a quiet warmth hearing that. Daniel Parker enjoys the same. Laura laughed softly and added, "Laura Bennett appreciates people who listen." At that moment my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. I glanced down and read the text out loud. Marcus Lee says rumors about Ryan Carter's business are spreading. Laura raised an eyebrow. "Ryan Carter?" I sighed quietly and replied, "Someone from the past." Laura looked thoughtful but didn't press further. Instead Laura said calmly, "Daniel Parker's future matters more." I smiled and answered, "Daniel Parker agrees." That night I sat on the apartment balcony watching the city lights and thinking about everything that had changed. Months earlier the same view felt empty and painful. Now the air felt calm. I whispered quietly to myself, "Daniel Parker is becoming someone stronger." My phone buzzed again with another message from Marcus. The text read, "Ryan Carter might be in trouble financially." I stared at the screen for a moment before setting the phone down. The news didn't feel satisfying or painful. It simply felt distant. Instead, my thoughts returned to Laura Bennett's warm smile and the peaceful conversations that followed each meeting. For the first time since Olivia left, I felt something I thought I had lost completely. Genuine peace. The first time I heard something was wrong in Ryan Carter's world came from Marcus Lee. Marcus called me one afternoon and said, "Daniel Parker needs to hear something interesting." I leaned back in my office chair and replied calmly, "Marcus Lee always sounds excited when gossip appears." Marcus laughed slightly and answered, "This time the gossip might be real." I asked quietly, "Ryan Carter?" Marcus responded immediately, "Yes. Ryan Carter apparently made risky investments that are collapsing." I stayed silent for a moment before saying, "Daniel Parker expected Ryan Carter to live comfortably forever." Marcus replied, "Ryan Carter's father Victor Carter is furious." Marcus Lee heard Victor Carter is demanding answers. I tapped my fingers on the desk while listening. Marcus continued, "Marcus Lee also heard something else. Olivia Brooks and Ryan Carter argue constantly now." I exhaled slowly. "That part doesn't surprise Daniel Parker." Marcus chuckled lightly. "Marcus Lee remembers when Olivia Brooks believed Ryan Carter offered a perfect life." I said calmly, "Perfect pictures on social media rarely show reality." Marcus laughed again. "Daniel Parker sounds wiser these days." I smiled slightly and replied, "Daniel Parker finally stopped believing appearances." 2 days later another unexpected call came. The name Sophia Brooks appeared on my phone. I answered carefully and said, "Daniel Parker speaking." Sophia's voice sounded hesitant. "Sophia Brooks hopes Daniel Parker doesn't mind the call." I replied politely, "Sophia Brooks can speak freely." Sophia sighed and said quietly, "Sophia Brooks feels uncomfortable saying this, but Olivia Brooks isn't doing well." I stayed silent. Sophia continued, "Ryan Carter's financial situation is worse than people think." I asked slowly, "How bad?" Sophia answered, "Ryan Carter lost a lot of money through risky deals. Victor Carter is pressuring Ryan Carter heavily." I leaned back in my chair and asked calmly, "And Olivia Brooks?" Sophia hesitated before replying, "Olivia Brooks and Ryan Carter fight almost every day now." I rubbed my forehead slightly. Sophia added softly, "Sophia Brooks thought Daniel Parker should know." I responded carefully, "Daniel Parker appreciates the honesty." Sophia paused before asking quietly, "Daniel Parker still cares about Olivia Brooks?" I thought about the question for a moment. Daniel Parker cares about peace more than the past. Sophia sounded thoughtful when replying, "Sophia Brooks hopes Olivia Brooks eventually understands that." Later that evening my phone buzzed again. This time the message came from Olivia Brooks. I stared at the screen while reading the first line. "Daniel, Olivia Brooks needs to talk." I didn't respond. A few minutes later another message arrived. "Olivia Brooks made mistakes." I sighed quietly and placed the phone on the table. The next morning more messages appeared. "Ryan Carter isn't the person Olivia Brooks thought." Another message followed quickly. "Daniel Parker was always kind." I read every message slowly but refused to reply. That afternoon Marcus Lee called again and asked, "Daniel Parker saw the messages?" I answered calmly, "Daniel Parker read them." Marcus asked directly, "Daniel Parker planning to answer?" I shook my head even though Marcus couldn't see it. "Daniel Parker doesn't think responding will change anything." Marcus sounded impressed. "Marcus Lee remembers a different Daniel Parker months ago." I smiled faintly and replied, "Daniel Parker remembers that person too." The messages from Olivia Brooks kept coming over the next few days. Some messages sounded apologetic. Some sounded confused. One message read, "Olivia Brooks feels lost." Another said, "Ryan Carter isn't the life Olivia Brooks imagined." Each message made me pause for a moment, but none of them changed my decision. One evening Emma called and asked gently, "Emma Parker heard Olivia Brooks contacted Daniel Parker again." I nodded even though Emma couldn't see me. "Yes." Emma asked carefully, "Daniel Parker answered?" I replied calmly, "Daniel Parker chose silence." Emma sounded relieved. "Emma Parker is proud of that choice." I smiled slightly and said, "Daniel Parker finally understands something important." Emma asked softly, "What?" I answered quietly, "Daniel Parker cannot repair consequences Olivia Brooks created." Emma paused before replying, "Emma Parker believes Daniel Parker finally understands self-respect." That night I sat on the balcony again watching the city lights flicker across the skyline. My phone buzzed once more with another message from Olivia Brooks. I picked up the phone, read the message slowly and then locked the screen without replying. The strange thing was that I didn't feel anger or satisfaction anymore. Instead I felt calm. I whispered quietly to myself, Daniel Parker survived something painful. The chaos in Olivia Brooks' life no longer controlled my emotions. Instead I watched the situation unfold from a distance. For the first time since everything ended, I understood something clearly. Olivia Brooks didn't destroy Daniel Parker's future. Olivia Brooks simply revealed a truth Daniel Parker needed to see. The knock on my apartment door came on a quiet spring afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, the last person I imagined standing there was Olivia Brooks. For a moment neither of us spoke. Olivia looked completely different from the confident woman who had walked away months earlier. Olivia's hair looked messy, Olivia's eyes looked tired, and Olivia's voice sounded uncertain. Daniel. Olivia Brooks knows this is unexpected, Olivia said quietly. I stepped back slightly and replied calmly, Olivia Brooks is correct. Olivia hesitated at the doorway and asked softly, Can Olivia Brooks come inside? I thought about the question for a few seconds before answering, Daniel Parker can listen. Olivia walked in slowly and stood in the living room looking around the apartment like the place held ghosts. Olivia whispered, Everything looks the same. I replied, Daniel Parker changed. Olivia lowered the eyes and said quietly, Olivia Brooks deserved that answer. For a moment the room stayed silent before Olivia spoke again. Daniel. Olivia Brooks made a terrible mistake. I folded my arms and asked calmly, Ryan Carter finally disappointed Olivia Brooks? Olivia sighed deeply and sat down on the edge of the couch. Ryan Carter wasn't the person Olivia Brooks believed. I nodded slowly and said, Daniel Parker remembers saying something similar months ago. Olivia rubbed the hands together nervously and continued, Ryan Carter's business started collapsing. Victor Carter blamed Ryan Carter for losing money. I leaned against the wall and replied, Daniel Parker heard rumors. Olivia looked up and said softly, The arguments never stopped after that. I stayed quiet while Olivia continued speaking. Ryan Carter became angry all the time. Ryan Carter blamed everyone for the problems. Olivia's voice grew weaker. Olivia Brooks realized too late that Ryan Carter was never stable. I looked at Olivia and asked quietly, And Olivia Brooks came here because Ryan Carter failed? Olivia shook the head slowly. Olivia Brooks came because Olivia Brooks realized something important. I raised an eyebrow. What realization? Olivia whispered, Daniel Parker was the person Olivia Brooks should have valued. The words sat heavily in the air between us. Olivia continued speaking carefully. Daniel Parker always supported Olivia Brooks. Daniel Parker listened. Daniel Parker cared about honesty. I looked away toward the window before answering calmly, Daniel Parker also remembers betrayal. Olivia's eyes filled with regret as Olivia spoke again. Olivia Brooks knows the damage Olivia Brooks caused. I took a deep breath and said quietly, Olivia Brooks destroyed trust. Olivia nodded slowly. Yes. The honesty surprised me. Olivia continued, Olivia Brooks believed excitement and money would create happiness. I replied calmly, Social media made Ryan Carter's life look perfect. Olivia sighed deeply. Ryan Carter cared about appearances more than people. I looked back at Olivia and asked quietly, And now Olivia Brooks regrets the choice? Olivia nodded without hesitation. Yes. I sat down across from Olivia and spoke honestly for the first time since everything ended. Daniel Parker spent months questioning everything. Daniel Parker wondered if loyalty was weakness. Olivia's voice trembled slightly. Loyalty was never weakness. I continued firmly, Daniel Parker also spent nights wondering why Olivia Brooks thought Daniel Parker wasn't enough. Olivia whispered, Daniel Parker was always enough. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Olivia leaned forward slightly and said something I had expected but still felt strange hearing. Daniel. Olivia Brooks wants another chance. I looked at Olivia carefully and asked, Another chance? Olivia nodded quickly. Olivia Brooks believes Daniel Parker and Olivia Brooks can rebuild what existed before. I stayed silent for a moment before responding. Olivia Brooks believes time can reverse decisions? Olivia shook the head slowly. Olivia Brooks believes love deserves another chance. I stood up and walked toward the window before answering. Daniel Parker loved Olivia Brooks deeply. Olivia's voice sounded hopeful. Then maybe that love still exists. I turned back toward Olivia and replied calmly, The love existed before betrayal. Olivia whispered softly, People can change. I looked directly at Olivia and said quietly, Daniel Parker already changed. Olivia's hopeful expression faded slightly as the meaning of those words settled into the room. Olivia stood slowly and walked closer before speaking again. Daniel Parker sounds stronger. I nodded. Pain forced growth. Olivia asked quietly, does Daniel Parker still feel something for Olivia Brooks? I answered honestly, Daniel Parker remembers everything. Olivia's voice softened. Then maybe the story isn't finished. I looked at Olivia for a long moment before replying calmly. The story changed the moment Olivia Brooks walked away. Olivia looked down at the floor before asking one final question. Does Daniel Parker believe forgiveness is possible? I thought carefully before answering. Forgiveness helps Daniel Parker move forward. Olivia looked hopeful again. I finished the sentence slowly. But forgiveness does not rebuild the past. Olivia stayed silent after hearing those words, and the quiet room suddenly felt heavier than any argument we had ever shared. I stood quietly in my living room looking at Olivia Brooks and realized something important had changed inside me. Months earlier I would have begged Olivia Brooks to stay. Months earlier I would have said anything to fix the relationship. But the man standing there now felt different. Olivia looked at me with hopeful eyes and asked softly, Daniel, does Daniel Parker still love Olivia Brooks? I took a slow breath before answering. Daniel Parker loved Olivia Brooks deeply once. Olivia stepped closer and said quickly, then Olivia Brooks believes everything can still be repaired. I shook my head gently. Love alone doesn't repair betrayal. Olivia's expression shifted with confusion. People make mistakes, Olivia whispered. I replied calmly, some mistakes change people forever. Olivia stared at me like those words were difficult to accept. I continued speaking carefully. Daniel Parker isn't angry anymore. Daniel Parker forgave Olivia Brooks a long time ago. Olivia looked surprised and asked quietly, then why does Daniel Parker sound so distant? I answered honestly, forgiveness and rebuilding a relationship are two different things. Olivia moved closer and spoke more urgently. Daniel Parker doesn't understand how much Olivia Brooks regrets leaving. I watched Olivia's expression carefully before replying. Daniel Parker understands regret. Olivia took another step forward. Then Daniel Parker should understand why Olivia Brooks came back. I crossed my arms calmly. Olivia Brooks came back because Ryan Carter's life collapsed. Olivia immediately shook the head. That isn't the only reason. I asked quietly, then what is the real reason? Olivia's voice softened. Olivia Brooks realized Daniel Parker was always the better person. I looked down briefly before answering. That realization came after Olivia Brooks destroyed trust. Olivia's eyes filled with tears as Olivia spoke again. Olivia Brooks knows the damage. I nodded slowly. Trust was the foundation of everything Daniel Parker believed in. Olivia whispered, trust can be rebuilt. I looked directly at Olivia and replied gently, some people rebuild trust together. Some people rebuild themselves alone. Olivia's voice trembled. Daniel Parker doesn't believe in second chances? I answered honestly. Daniel Parker believes in growth. Olivia sat down slowly on the couch as the words sank in. Tears started forming in Olivia's eyes while Olivia spoke quietly. Daniel Parker moved forward without Olivia Brooks. I nodded slightly. Yes. Olivia wiped the tears away and asked softly, did Daniel Parker replace Olivia Brooks already? I hesitated before answering. Daniel Parker didn't replace Olivia Brooks. Daniel Parker rebuilt life. Olivia's voice sounded fragile. Olivia Brooks thought the love between Daniel Parker and Olivia Brooks was permanent. I replied calmly, love can be permanent. Trust cannot. Olivia lowered the head and whispered, Olivia Brooks wishes the past could be erased. I sat down across from Olivia and answered gently. Daniel Parker wished for that once too. Olivia looked up slowly and asked, then why does Daniel Parker sound so calm? I thought about the question for a moment before replying. Pain teaches people how to grow. Olivia's tears began falling more openly now. Olivia Brooks never wanted to hurt Daniel Parker this deeply. I sighed quietly and said, intentions don't erase consequences. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Olivia wiped the tears again and asked quietly, does Daniel Parker remember the nights when Daniel Parker and Olivia Brooks planned a future together? I nodded slowly. Daniel Parker remembers every promise. Olivia's voice trembled as Olivia continued. Olivia Brooks believed Daniel Parker would always be there. I replied softly, Daniel Parker was there. Olivia whispered, then why can't everything go back to the way things were? I leaned back in the chair before answering carefully. Because betrayal changes people. Olivia looked confused and asked, "How did betrayal change Daniel Parker?" I took a slow breath and answered honestly. Daniel Parker learned self-respect. Olivia stayed silent while absorbing those words. I continued gently. Months ago, Daniel Parker begged Olivia Brooks for answers. Daniel Parker felt powerless and broken. Olivia's eyes filled with guilt. I finished quietly, "Today Daniel Parker understands personal value." Olivia stood slowly and walked closer again. Tears still rested on Olivia's cheeks while Olivia spoke one final time. Daniel Parker truly moved on. I nodded. Yes. Olivia's voice sounded almost defeated. Olivia Brooks thought Daniel Parker would always be waiting. I looked at Olivia calmly and replied, "Daniel Parker waited longer than Daniel Parker should have." Olivia looked down at the floor while whispering, "Olivia Brooks feels like the story ended too soon." I answered gently, "The story didn't end too soon." Olivia looked up again with tired eyes. I finished the thought quietly. The story ended the moment Olivia Brooks chose someone else. Olivia said nothing after hearing those words. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument. And for the first time since the relationship ended, I understood something clearly. I wasn't choosing revenge. I wasn't choosing anger. I was choosing myself. A few weeks after Olivia Brooks left my apartment that afternoon, Marcus Lee called again with the kind of voice that meant news had spread quickly. "Daniel Parker sitting down?" Marcus asked. I laughed quietly and replied, "Daniel Parker standing in the kitchen actually." Marcus chuckled. "Marcus Lee suggests sitting anyway." I poured coffee slowly and said, "Marcus Lee clearly has something dramatic to say." Marcus didn't waste time. Ryan Carter's company collapsed. I stayed silent for a moment before asking calmly, "Collapsed how?" Marcus explained, "Victor Carter's firm pulled support after investigations into risky investments and legal violations." I leaned against the counter and replied, "Daniel Parker expected financial trouble but not complete collapse." Marcus continued speaking. Ryan Carter lost major investors. Lawsuits started appearing. I nodded slightly and said quietly, "Success built on ego rarely survives pressure." Marcus laughed softly. "Daniel Parker sounds philosophical." I answered honestly, "Daniel Parker simply learned patience." A few days later, Emma Parker called while I was leaving work. Emma sounded thoughtful and said, "Emma Parker heard Olivia Brooks isn't attending social events anymore." I unlocked my car and replied calmly, "Money often attracts temporary friends." Emma continued gently, "Sophia Brooks mentioned Olivia Brooks feels isolated now." I sat inside the car and said quietly, "Olivia Brooks built a life around appearances." Emma paused before asking carefully, "Daniel Parker feels angry hearing this?" I shook my head even though Emma couldn't see me. "Daniel Parker feels surprisingly calm." Emma sounded relieved. Emma Parker hoped Daniel Parker reached that point. I started the engine and said thoughtfully, "Daniel Parker once believed karma meant revenge." Emma asked curiously, "What does Daniel Parker believe now?" I answered slowly, "Karma simply allows people to experience the consequences of choices." That evening I met Marcus Lee at the same cafe where Marcus once handed me the business folder months earlier. Marcus slid a newspaper article across the table and said, "Ryan Carter's name appears again." I glanced at the headline describing legal investigations connected to Victor Carter's company. Marcus watched my reaction carefully and asked, "Daniel Parker satisfied seeing this?" I thought about the question before answering. Daniel Parker expected to feel satisfaction. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "But Daniel Parker doesn't?" I shook my head slightly. "Watching someone fall doesn't rebuild Daniel Parker's past." Marcus smiled slightly. Marcus Lee respects that answer. I leaned back in the chair and added quietly, "Daniel Parker learned something important. Happiness cannot depend on someone else's failure." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Daniel Parker sounds like a different person." I smiled faintly. Daniel Parker became someone stronger. My phone buzzed while Marcus and I were still talking. The message came from Laura Bennett. I read the text and smiled before showing Marcus the screen. Marcus leaned forward and asked playfully, "Laura Bennett planning another volunteer project?" I laughed and replied, "Laura Bennett invited Daniel Parker to dinner." Marcus grinned immediately. "Marcus Lee likes Laura Bennett already." I shook my head with amusement and said, "Laura Bennett simply enjoys conversation." Marcus leaned back and said confidently, "Marcus Lee believes Daniel Parker enjoys Laura Bennett's company more than Daniel Parker admits." I didn't argue. Instead I replied quietly, "Laura Bennett listens carefully." Marcus smiled knowingly. Laura Bennett also makes Daniel Parker smile more often. I couldn't deny that. That night I met Laura at a small restaurant near the river. Laura looked up from the table and greeted me warmly. "Daniel Parker looks relaxed tonight," Laura said with a smile. I sat down and replied honestly, "Life feels steadier lately." Laura studied my expression and asked gently, "Something changed recently?" I nodded slightly and said, "Ryan Carter's business collapsed." Laura looked surprised but calm. "Daniel Parker feels vindicated?" I shook my head. "Daniel Parker feels distant from the situation." Laura smiled thoughtfully. "That sounds like growth." I looked at Laura for a moment before replying quietly, "Laura Bennett helped with that growth." Laura laughed softly and said, "Laura Bennett only listened." I answered honestly, "Listening matters." After dinner Laura and I walked slowly along the riverfront while city lights reflected on the water. Laura asked softly, "Daniel Parker proud of the person Daniel Parker became?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. Daniel Parker once believed losing Olivia Brooks destroyed the future. Laura looked curious. "And now?" I smiled gently. "Now Daniel Parker understands losing Olivia Brooks revealed the future." Laura nodded approvingly and said quietly, "Laura Bennett believes Daniel Parker deserves happiness." I stopped walking for a moment and looked out at the river. The calm feeling inside my chest felt stronger than anything I had known before. For the first time in years I felt something simple and powerful at the same time. Pride. Not pride in success or revenge. Pride in the man I had slowly become. A full year passed before I truly noticed how different life felt. Spring arrived again, bringing warm sunlight and fresh air through the city. That afternoon I walked slowly through the park beside Laura Bennett. Laura glanced at me and smiled gently. "Daniel Parker looks peaceful today," Laura said. I laughed softly and replied, "Daniel Parker feels peaceful." Laura looked curious. "That sounds important." I nodded slightly. A year ago Daniel Parker stood in a very different place emotionally. Laura stopped walking and asked quietly, "Daniel Parker thinking about Olivia Brooks again?" I considered the question before answering honestly. "Daniel Parker thinks about the past differently now." Laura tilted the head slightly. "Differently how?" I took a slow breath and replied, "Daniel Parker no longer feels anger." Laura and I continued walking along the path while sunlight filtered through the trees. Laura asked thoughtfully, "Daniel Parker carried anger for a long time?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. Daniel Parker once believed Olivia Brooks destroyed everything." Laura looked at me carefully and said softly, "But Daniel Parker doesn't believe that anymore." I shook my head and smiled slightly. "No. Daniel Parker eventually realized something important." Laura raised an eyebrow. Laura Bennett curious about that realization. I stopped near a bench and said quietly, "Losing Olivia Brooks forced Daniel Parker to rebuild life completely." Laura sat down beside me and asked gently, "And rebuilding life helped Daniel Parker discover something better?" I nodded again. "Yes." Laura smiled warmly. Laura Bennett likes that answer. I looked around the park while children laughed nearby and replied, "Daniel Parker once believed the worst night of Daniel Parker's life was the moment Olivia Brooks walked away." Laura listened carefully while I continued speaking. "That night felt like the end of everything Daniel Parker believed in." Laura spoke softly. "Painful endings sometimes hide new beginnings." I smiled at that sentence. Daniel Parker didn't understand that at the time. Laura tilted the head slightly and asked, "What helped Daniel Parker understand eventually?" I answered honestly. Marcus Lee helped Daniel Parker rebuild confidence. Emma Parker reminded Daniel Parker about self-respect. Laura nodded slowly. Laura Bennett only listened. I shook my head gently. Listening changed more than Laura Bennett realizes. Laura laughed quietly. Laura Bennett enjoys hearing that. I looked directly at Laura and said calmly, "Laura Bennett entered Daniel Parker's life during a moment when Daniel Parker was learning how to breathe again." Laura's smile softened as Laura responded, "Laura Bennett grateful Daniel Parker allowed that." We continued walking along the park trail while the breeze moved gently through the trees. Laura glanced at me again and asked carefully, "Daniel Parker ever misses Olivia Brooks?" I thought about the question for a few seconds before answering honestly. Daniel Parker misses the memories sometimes. Laura nodded understandingly. Memories rarely disappear completely. I smiled slightly. But the pain connected to those memories disappeared. Laura looked relieved hearing that. Laura Bennett proud of Daniel Parker's growth. I laughed softly. Daniel Parker didn't grow alone. Laura raised an eyebrow playfully. Marcus Lee and Emma Parker deserve credit. I nodded and added, Laura Bennett deserves credit too. Laura shook the head lightly. Laura Bennett simply walked beside Daniel Parker. I replied gently, walking beside someone during difficult seasons matters. After a few moments of quiet walking, Laura asked another question. Daniel Parker believes everything happened for a reason? I thought carefully before answering. Daniel Parker believes painful moments reveal hidden strength. Laura looked thoughtful and said softly, Laura Bennett likes that perspective. I smiled and replied, Daniel Parker learned that strength only appears when life removes comfortable illusions. Laura laughed quietly. Ryan Carter definitely removed illusions from Olivia Brooks. I chuckled slightly. Ryan Carter taught Daniel Parker something unexpected. Laura looked curious. What lesson? I answered calmly. Ryan Carter showed Daniel Parker that chasing appearances leads nowhere. Laura nodded in agreement. Laura Bennett prefers honesty over appearances. I smiled warmly. Daniel Parker noticed. We reached the small bridge that crossed the park lake and stopped to look at the water reflecting the afternoon sky. Laura leaned against the railing and said quietly, Daniel Parker looks proud today. I looked at the reflection of sunlight on the water and answered slowly. Daniel Parker feels proud. Laura asked softly, proud of what? I took a deep breath before answering. Daniel Parker proud of surviving something painful without becoming bitter. Laura smiled gently. Laura Bennett believes that kind of strength changes everything. I nodded and replied thoughtfully, Daniel Parker finally understands something important. Laura looked curious again. What truth? I turned toward Laura and answered calmly. Sometimes losing the person Daniel Parker loved most became the moment Daniel Parker found the person Daniel Parker was meant to become.